What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that The Old Guard is no perfect movie. And The Old Guard is about a group of immortal mercenaries led by Charlize Theron as Andy, who are on the run from a CIA operative, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, and a scientist, played by Dudley Dursley from Harry Potter, who wants to take their blood, DNA, bone marrow, stuff like that, and find some life-enhancing uses for it against their own will. And while they're in the process of hiding, they come across this brand new immortal, a Marine soldier played by KiKi Layne, who they take under their wing and try to protect her at all costs, while also basically giving her the hard truth about the strengths and weaknesses of supposedly living forever. And I really wanted to check this movie out without even seeing a trailer, without hearing about it until this week, because Charlize Theron in an action movie, Chris Stuckman said it in his video, but with Mad Max Fury Road and parts of Atomic Blonde and Aeon Flux, Charlize Theron is badass to watch in an action movie, and she puts a great deal of hard work and effort into the stunts. And when I found out that the characters in this movie were immortal mercenaries and that it was based off of a comic, I got so many ideas in my head, again, without seeing a trailer, what the fight choreography was going to look like, what the kills were going to look like, just so many creative ways that you can bring someone back to life. Which is why I was incredibly disappointed to find out that the majority of the action scenes in this movie basically rip off the John Wick style of gun fu, where you grab an assault rifle, you go down a hall, 1-2 steps, shoot, 1-2 steps, shoot, and then maybe a generic judo throw in there with camera work that's not awful, but it is very distractingly handheld with a lot of quick cuts during the actual physical combat sequences that make it really, not only really hard to follow, but really hard to feel the weight of each punch and kick, because every time someone gets hit, it cuts to a brand new camera angle for seemingly no reason. And sure, John Wick does have sequences where it is mostly just headshots and a couple judo throws. But that's not all they use. They use their fists, they use their feet, they use belts, ropes, horses, dogs, cars, swords, knives, axes, a fucking pencil. They take their budgets and they do absolutely everything they can with it. And for me personally, whenever I see any actor just shooting a gun on screen and that's it, I'm just like, any actor can pretend to do that. Not every actor can dedicate months of their time, hours a day, learning so many different varieties of martial arts in order to make it look completely effortless. Charlize Theron can do that with Mad Max and Atomic Blonde for sure. With these other actors, I'm not entirely positive about how much work they put into it. And when it comes down to them being immortal and whenever they get shot and come back to life, they don't really do that much with it either. They just have their shot wounds and stab wounds heal up very quickly. Sometimes a bullet pops out like Wolverine. There are so many creative ways that you can bring someone immortal back to life in a gory, over-the-top way. Like in Bakano, whenever someone loses a limb and loses a great deal of blood, the limb and the blood just flies right back. And I feel like you can do that in a film if you have the budget. I don't know how big of a budget Netflix had to shoot The Long Guard, because they don't reveal budgets that they make for their original movies, only for movies that they pay to distribute, like Roma. So I'm not entirely sure if they didn't have enough money or if they didn't have enough time, but if that's the case, why would you take on a big superhero story like this? Even when there are purely just fistfights, like the best scene in the movie, this fight between Charlize Theron and KiKi Layne, where Theron is basically trying to see if Layne really does have the skills necessary to be a mercenary, that fight was really cool. But the scenes that are purely fistfights are either a few seconds or 1 minute tops, and I have absolutely no idea why. I could just immediately go back to budgetary reasons. They don't have enough money or time, so they cut on every single impact in order to save on footage and work hours. And not only that, just, again, film it with a handheld camera so you don't have to waste so much time putting on a tripod. You don't film it in wider, longer takes like they did with Atomic Blonde or John Wick, because those are really the things that, if you're going to knock off John Wick, knock off the camera work. Do not go gritty and handheld unless you're actually showing the action for longer than 5 seconds. That is what action fans desperately need. And yes, this is a first-time action movie for this director. I can't remember her name right off the bat, but she's most famous for directing The Secret Life of Bees with Queen Latifah. So this is a director who is good at giving out great performances from actors, regardless of whether the material is deeply complex or a little too sappy. But in regards to filming action, it's clear as day that this was a first try. But action aside, how are the performances and the characters? Yeah, the weird thing is, I wouldn't really describe this movie as an action movie. I would describe it as a drama with action sequences, because I can't even count how many fight sequences there were, because there really were that few. The majority of the movie is the characters in a secluded area, sitting in a circle, explaining the rules of what it's like to be immortal, explaining each other's backstories, analyzing what they did wrong in the past and what they could do better in the future, which would be fine. Some of these characters do have clearly defined backstories, like Charlize Theron especially. She's the leader because she's lived the longest, she's experienced the most hardships, so when she takes KiKi Layne under her wing, we as an audience really hope that the two of them can come to grips with how shitty of a situation they're in and try to focus more on the positives in life, the people that they help, and the long-term consequences that come in a good fashion. And KiKi Layne was a legitimate surprise for me personally, because usually brand new members of superhero teams tend to be clumsy damsels in distress who serve comedic purposes by getting captured or dropping something or some stupid shit like that. That was not the case here. She was a Marine. Her first scene is showing off her backstory of what a skilled Marine corporal she was. And when she's executing certain missions as part of the team, she never drops her guard, and I really appreciated that. She never got too emotionally sucked into what was going on, that she never got distracted, which is important for the military training that she got. And out of all the backstories, hers felt the most fleshed out. We see in a few seconds, once she discovers that she is immortal, all her friends immediately stop talking to her because something incredibly weird just happened, and something weird can happen to us if we stick around her. And most of these scenes are told without dialogue. We get this one sequence where she's packing her bags. She looks at this picture of a man who we immediately assume is her father. And we can immediately understand why she's in the military, who she's doing this for, where she probably learned these skills from. We get all those clues without copious amounts of exposition. Even though they do explain her backstory towards the climax in full detail, and out of all the info dump expository monologues, hers felt the most earned because she was the new member. She feels like she has to express herself amongst these new friends in order to connect with them and in order to find some common ground. So Charlize Theron and KiKi Layne in particular were really good. Dudley Dursley as the villain does have a clear and concise motivation, but he has such an over-the-top personality, these facial expressions, and incredibly random, loud line deliveries that serve absolutely no purpose. You can't take him seriously as a villain, even though they're giving us valid reasons to take him seriously. But he's just a cartoon character, nothing else. Almost the same with Chiwetel Ejiofor, because he's given more of a backstory as to why he would try and force people against their will to make a sacrifice for the greater good, but all he does is explain his past. We never see it for ourselves. The most we get is a picture of a dead loved one, and that's really about it. And that's the big problem with the character development in this movie. Even though the majority of the sequences are characters shooting the ship with each other, learning stuff, finding common ground, which would be a fresh change of pace for a superhero movie if the character development was good, it's nothing but facts. We don't really get that many emotionally investing moments when all you're doing is explaining not even your own past, you're explaining the past of someone else while they're sitting moping in the corner. And that's really all you get. There's one member of the team who, the most interesting thing about him is that in one particular scene, he changes sides twice based on conflicting emotions, even though we really know nothing about this guy, and then all of a sudden he becomes a major focus in the very end. And the focus of the final scene that sets up a sequel, because it's a superhero movie based off of a comic book, why wouldn't it be? And there's There's one subplot that really pissed me off because of how out of the blue it was and how it became the sole focus of two characters who were really just in the background and had a few smart-ass quips here and there, because that's the only common thing we know about this team of immortal mercenaries. They have sarcastic quips off of each other, and that's really about it. But there were these two guys in particular who get captured halfway through, and then when their captors sarcastically say, "What, is this guy your boyfriend?" The one captive goes on a huge monologue about the stuff they've been through, and it's just like, it's more than a boyfriend, and then they make out, and I'm just like, wait, where did this come from? And before anyone freaks out, let me make this clear. I don't have a problem with gay characters. I do have a problem, however, with their sexuality being the most interesting thing, if not the only interesting thing about them. And sadly, this movie did a clumsy job at making these characters interesting. Their sexuality was the only thing you know about them, therefore the only interesting thing about them, and as a result, they just feel like tropes. They feel like archetypes. They don't feel like characters. And a part of me wants to say that this movie's trying to force diversity on the audience, but in a weird way, the movie's message kind of goes against that, because the villains throughout the majority of the movie look at these immortal mercenaries and say, you're not sacrificing your own lives for the greater good by taking part in these experiments that could heal the sick, make people last for longer than 80 years. How selfish of you. And then the movie goes, that's not your choice to make. That's not your right to take away from us. We fight the battles that we believe are necessary and can help, maybe not the entire world, but can help a small group of people who will be eternally grateful for that. And I thought that was an excellent message, because we live in a period of time where everyone decides, if you're not making a difference the way we are, then you're not making any difference at all. And this movie says, fuck that. You can make a difference in the world by your way, your choice, and yours only. And I thought that was fantastic. That's a message that seems risky nowadays, but with the fact that there are two characters in this movie who their only personality, their only backstory is that they've been gay lovers for hundreds of years, which does sound a little bit intriguing. It doesn't really change the fact that they're not really interesting other than they're gay, and that's really about it. And there are so many other comic book movie tropes that I can go on and on about, like how this is an origin story, even though at the beginning of the movie this team is like, we've risked so much, we're out in the open, we don't think we're making that big of a difference in the world, we're out, and then all of a sudden this new girl suddenly makes some of them change their minds. And of course it does set up for a very sequel, which, seeing how the Netflix budget for this movie affected the action sequences, I don't really know how that's going to work out. There's so many other things I could complain about other than the fact, like, the first half of the movie is them, like, taking this brand new immortal under their wing and showing her the ropes, and then all of a sudden it becomes a moral dilemma story about the sacrifices that we make, whether we do them because we want to or other people force you to, just based on their own predetermined beliefs. This movie had a lot going for it, and they had absolutely no idea how to do it. And for all those reasons, all those very messy and convoluted reasons, I have no idea how this video is going to turn out. I feel like I've gone off base so many times, so I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to give The Old Guard a 2 out of 5. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If you have seen The Old Guard, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Feel free to disagree, that's completely your right. Be sure to stay tuned for the rest of my Studio Ghibli series, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.